Sasha, you talked about this, that there's other methods of doing it. And one of the things when I was lucky enough to interview President Obama, and this is an issue we argued about, but when he was campaigning, he was talking about privacy and the protection of data and everything else. And when he became president, he changed rather drastically and was behind the idea of decrypting things and getting information. And I said, you've shifted. He said, no, I haven't. I said, no, it's a really dramatic shift. And he said, well, I've seen some of the terrorist chatter coming over. When you see, you don't want one iPhone to have, if you didn't get into an iPhone or didn't get into a cell phone, that a terrorist attack happened and you weren't able to prevent it because that. And it was, it's a very emotional argument, and politicians take advantage of that idea. And to me, when you say that, it's very clear, and at the same time, it opens a cornucopia of issues. And I think my response was, so all of civilization rests on a single iPhone? You don't have other tools to figure out terrorist attacks and things like that?
And this is the bottom line. You can regulate, potentially, in one market, in 3 markets, in 10 markets. But there will be somewhere that will not regulate. And we know this now. We live, of course, in a world where we have different rules applied in different places. So the reality of the impact of doing this kind of thing is quite limited anyway.
Right.
Because they will be using encryption.
Well, if they have the iPhone, they'll go to WhatsApp. They'll go to WhatsApp. They go to Telegram. It's like a string of...
And this is part of the challenge for the companies, that they are working in a very fragmented juridical space around the world. And one of the issues that Adam is trying to work on, one of the things that we're trying to do is try to work towards harmonization. And juridical review and due process and so on, very, very important in this space. But the reality is, right now, we better get much better at old-fashioned intelligence work.
Right.
In order to be able to break through this particular challenge, we're going to have people on the ground doing the old-fashioned thing, which is infiltrating groups and doing this. And I think that there is a recognition in intelligence services that that's going to have to be the approach for this side of the problem. You said that there's a consensus around the removal of terrorist content. I think that's... interesting that you have that perception. It's not the perception I have.
Yeah,
I think there's a lot of...
oh, no, I agree with you.
Similar,
Yeah, I agree with you. So, Robert, the one where they do agree on a little more, although I think you're right that they don't, is the removal of content and whose content should be removed and who is a terrorist and who is not. There's varying debate. When it comes to ISIS, most of these tech companies will remove and monitor this content. When it comes to Russia, they apparently didn't know it was there. And then when it comes to Charlottesville, they let it flourish, with Nazi organizations and things like that. And so it's a little more complicated. Sasha, why don't you talk about this issue? Because content removal seems to be a relatively easy subject, like take down the terrorist organization. But it's not. And especially when you have a libertarian mindset, First Amendment mindset from most of those tech companies and their founders.
I mean, there's 2 things. Content is, of course, context.
Right.
Everything is context. And so there is a terrible set of, law of unintended consequences that can happen with content removal. This is not to say that we shouldn't be attempting to remove a layer of content that is clearly egregious. But I would ask everybody here, would you know terrorist content if you saw it? Because actually the most effective terrorist content out there is often the non-violent terrorist content. And we've just classified terrorist content in a way to simplify it in order to work with smaller companies to understand what that might look like into 9 categories. From violent through to non-violent, from branded through to non-branded, and so on. And then understanding a little bit better the impact of each of those categories on recruitment, which is the problem, which is the thing we're trying to stop. So there's just that. And then whose terrorist organization?
Yeah, which one?
Who's defining that? Even that we have no consensus on internationally. So there's a whole set of problems here that we are giving the companies to solve. Part of those challenges I think we need to be taking on board on a cross industry basis, because and so then is the question of who makes the decision and why, on what basis. I think there's another thing. There is a set of unintended consequences that we see with some of the best attempts at this. So there's an example of footage of terrible atrocities committed against civilians in Syria by the Assad regime, which was removed because it was violent and it seemed like terrorist content. Now, there is a lot of content that human rights organizations are trying to get visibility for that raises, the flag on hideous crimes that otherwise wouldn't be seen by the world. Context is a very, very challenging thing here. Then there is the question of what is it that we're trying to achieve. So there's a lot of talk now in policy circuits about having to remove that content within a 2-hour time frame.
Right.
That's the objective, because in fact, content has done its damage within that 2-hour time frame, and so on. And of course, the big focus has been on the four big companies. But the migration onto smaller platforms, of course, is absolutely dramatic. And so we're constantly sort of running after. There's a kind of whack-a-mole challenge here. Not to say that we mustn't be making those efforts, but it is very complex. I'd say the other thing is that we forget that there are other things that we can do and we need to be doing at the same time. And they may not have the same immediacy, but ultimately, long-term, we need to be educating to get people resilient to what they're seeing and what they're engaging with online, and how content is being pushed to them. I think there is a set of issues around the algorithms that amplify and target, and the impact that has on individual users that might be vulnerable to certain types of content. And so how quickly do you get enclosed into an ecosystem that is feeding back to you? That iterative process is actually quite damaging.
There's a lot to unpack here. So let's talk about that, because it is more. It's not as easy as the thing. You want to stop recruitment. You want to do things. There's lots of platforms. It's not clear who decides who a terrorist is. So. And
there's no such consensus at the moment.
No, not at all.
And on this point about strategy, if I might, you're absolutely right. We require a strategy, but actually, there is an absence of such a strategy in the sense that we still don't have a framework for measuring success. So we keep having the lambasting of companies, the lambasting of governments, back and forth. Do more of what? 250,000 accounts removed by Twitter. Right. Is that great? Is that terrible? Yeah. Nobody has any idea of what that actually means.
Well,
so
I think
there's no benchmark.
I really want Mark Zuckerberg to decide who a terrorist is, and that's and just from the incidents around Russia, for example, they don't have control of their own platforms. That's their story right now. Who knows what happened? And in some cases, I believe it, because you look at some of the chaos internally at these companies, and then billions and billions of transactions that are happening all the time. They've lost control of their platform. I want to finish up talking about, are there other tools to stop this? One of the ones that Mark discussed in his giant essay about these issues, about community and stuff like that, was the use of AI. And if each of you, we've just got a few minutes, is that the solution? Is that there's technological solutions beyond? You said you always need humans. I do agree on that. I think one of the problems they had was firing humans. But can each of you talk really briefly, because we only have 3 minutes, about the uses, what other technologies can be used to prevent this? So, why don't we start here and then
I just want to say I'm not in any way suggesting that we shouldn't be starting with the most egregious stuff and making sure that we're doing everything to remove that swiftly, and the hashing database and your purpose around that specific content has meant that there's been real impact. Though still, the proportion of content being removed through IRU referrals is very small compared to the total. We need to do more in this space, so I completely agree with that. But AI, I think each of the companies, now the big companies, has committed to using machine learning and AI to this purpose more. There is a human review piece of work that has to happen on the tail end to avoid the unintended consequences piece.
Right.
And as we progress in this space, we need to test these responses and look at what the negative implications might be for different constituencies. We need to be careful about what we do. Just one point, counter speech. We need to compete with this stuff, and we also need to be using the tools available here, technological tools, communication strategies, to do proper competition with the extremists who are deploying very successfully, very professionally. So there are other ways in which we create an ecosystem. We need to look at this space as an ecosystem.
So get more
User
noisy.
Journey,
Great.
more going on.
More noisy.
More noisy.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. It's been a great panel. Thank you all for being so thoughtful.
Thank you.